Good evening. I'd like to call to order the business meeting of the Portland Board of Public Education. It is March 29th, 2022, and we're meeting in a blended format with some of us in person at Casco Bay High School and others joining via Zoom. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. 1 second, please. Ms. Bondo,
Isol?
Mr. Burke.
Here.
Ms. Russell Better,
Here.
Ms. Biliu, Mr. Youssef,
Here.
Ms. Aslami, Mr. McLaughlin, Mr. Alzamili,
Here.
Ms. Santiago, Ms. Diu,
Here.
and Chair Figdor.
Here. And Ms. Santiago did let me know that she's unable to join us tonight because she has a basketball conflict. Okay, with that, I want to invite you to join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You're Ella?
Maggie.
Maggie, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I want to introduce to the board Maggie Ellis, who is joining us tonight as the acting student rep for Casco Bay High School. Welcome. We really look forward to your time with us, and we'll help you navigate everything as we get into it. So yeah, welcome, and thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you. Nice to meet you. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay. Portland Public Schools recognizes the original inhabitants of the land on which our city and schools stand. The Wolas Ta'igig, or Maliseet, Micmac, Penobscot, and Passamaquoddy tribes, known collectively as the Wabanaki Confederacy, or People of the Dawnland. We are honored to have Wabanaki children among our students today, and as a district, we are committed to making the past, present, and future of Wabanaki peoples visible in our schools and our classrooms. So tonight, this is a special meeting for the purposes of a first read on the proposed FY23, fiscal year 23 school budget. There will also be a public hearing on the budget. And we're going to start tonight, as is customary, with public comment. So this is not the public comment on our budget, but on other issues that the public is interested in talking with the board about. So if anyone would like to comment on an issue other than the budget, please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom, and you'll have 3 minutes to address the board. Please start with your name and address. And I don't see any hands, so I'm going to go ahead and close public comment and move to the report of the chair. Given that this is a special meeting to consider the budget, I will keep my comments tonight focused on the budget. And specifically, I'm going to talk a bit about the budget process. So right now, the school board goes through a 3-step approval process. The school budget goes through a 3-step approval process each year. The school board amends and approves the budget. The city council amends and approves the school budget. And finally, it goes to the voters to decide. This 3-step approval process contrasts with the city budget, the city council budget, which is a 1-step approval process. The city council simply approves its own budget. I don't mind process if it's going to result in an outcome that's good for our students. But right now we have to fight very hard each year for a good outcome for our students. The city council has veto power over our budget, but city councilors otherwise have no authority over public education in our city. Personally, I find it both paternalistic and baffling. Sorry, I just lost my screen.
My apologies.
It's okay. Personally, I find it both paternalistic and baffling that public officials with no authority over public education in the city are the ones who, under our current charter, make the most important decision affecting public education in Portland each year. I'm raising this now because next Wednesday, April 6th, the Charter Commission will consider a proposal from Commissioner Marcus Houston that would give the school board the authority to give a conditional approval to our budget and then send it to the voters for final approval. This two-step process would be more democratic, transparent, and accountable, and result in more student-centered budgets. The school board has endorsed this approach, the approach in Commissioner Houston's proposal. I want to thank the board for that. And I encourage all of my colleagues on the board, as well as staff, families, and the public, to attend the public hearing next Wednesday, April 6th. Starts at 6. And once the agenda is published, there'll be times, approximate times for each agenda item, but that is not yet available. And I'm hopeful that together we can pass Commissioner Houston's proposal and put public education in Portland on a fundamentally stronger footing for the future. And with that, we move to the superintendent. Superintendent, do you have a report tonight?
Thank you, Madam Chair. All I'm doing is just doing a brief review of where we are with the budget so that we can then move on to the public hearing and the first read.
Excellent. Please go ahead then.
Yep. So today we're bringing to you in first read the Finance Committee's approved FY23 budget. This, as you know, is the first read of the budget that you will be asked to approve at the meeting next week on April 5th. That would then go to the City Council on April 11th and then go through the council approval process leading up to, ultimately leading up to the referendum in June. So this slide shows you where we are in the what we consider the board leg of this process. So we're now have gone through the board finance committee review. That's what the budget that you have in front of you today is, the budget that was approved by the finance committee. So you know that all of the work that we do as a district is directed at achieving our Portland Promise goals, particularly our focus on making sure that as a school district, we are producing equitable results for all of our students. And the way that we do that is through our other goals of achievement, whole student, and undergirded by our people. And that is the way that we've organized our work, and our budget is built around that premise. This year's budget is themed, keeping the focus on teaching and learning. I think those of you who have followed this budget process along understand why we understand that to be central to the work that we're doing, and it's particularly appropriate given the investments that we've made over the years to advance the work of teaching and learning in the district. So this gives you a bird's eye view of what our investments have been over the past 5 years in the Portland Promise. And so these are by year the kinds of investments that we've made to advance the work of achieving those goals that I just talked about. Last year was our year to really make very significant investments in advancing our work, particularly around our equity focus. And so you see that last year we made almost $3 million worth of new investments directed at advancing our work, and particularly around our equity work. The way that this has played out in our budget is illustrated by this slide that you've seen before, that documents the increase, particularly of staffing in areas that directly affect our students and that are very much built around achieving those equitable results. So whether it's social workers and counselors, our behavioral health supports, our work to engage families, particularly those families that traditionally have been underrepresented in our work, through the work that our parent community family engagement specialists do, our pre-kindergarten work, our youth development, or our support for our LAU plan designed to meet the needs of our English language learners. You can see that a significant part of our budget has gone to increase our investment in these areas. So this year's budget goals are focused on keeping teaching and learning at the center is, primarily about not sliding backwards. We've made very significant investments. This is a very difficult financial year for the school district, as you know, and as we will talk about in a minute. And so there are not a lot of new things in our budget this year, because one of our primary focuses was on, not sliding backwards, not giving up any of those investments that we've made over the years, and then really advancing our core priorities by focusing on execution. This has been a particularly difficult year for all of our people in the Portland Public Schools with the challenges brought on by COVID. And so there have been things that we hoped to achieve this year that we've had to slow down and not move forward at the same rate that we would have wanted to. So for us to really spend this next year focusing on executing on those investments is a big part of the work that we need to do. And at the heart of that is focusing on deepening our support so that all of our students have access to a quality instruction every day, and that we support and continue to develop safe and equitable schools for all of our students. And there are, as we will talk about in a minute, some investments in this budget, and those are, for the most part, supported with different revenue streams that don't require additional general revenue funds. And we won't be talking about this today, but we envision a process down the road where there are a number of things that we've not been able to advance that we believe can be advanced using our federal funding for ARPA. And so there will be an opportunity for the board to engage in that process down the road. So we're going to talk a little bit about the budget, and our focus today is really going to be on sort of contrasting what you've seen before. So the budget that was my recommended budget with the one that is formally in front of you today, which is the school board, the finance committee's approved budget. So this is my original recommendation, and this is the current version of the budget. So you can see that there is a small increase, about $150,000, that are additions that were approved by the finance committee, and I'll be talking about those in a moment. The overall increase went up from 5.1% to 5.2%. But as you can see, there was no change in the tax rate increase, because the way that we achieved that is by using additional funds from the reserves. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And so I'm going to turn it over to Kathy to help us with the next couple of slides. Kathy Winchenbach, our Executive Director for Budget and Finance.
Thank you. Good evening. So this slide is comparing the FY22 approved budget to the Finance Committee recommended budget in terms of dollars and percentage increases. So the Finance Committee recommended budget is $133.1 million, and that's made up of three components: salary and benefits, debt service, and all other. The only change is to the salary and benefits line from the superintendent's recommended budget, and it increased by $153,295, and it now reflects a $4.4 million increase from FY22. And then on the revenue side, the only change from the superintendent's recommended budget, as he's mentioned, is the use of fund balance, which also increased by $153,295. So the bottom line increase in budgeted expenditures and revenues is now $6.6 million, or 5.2%. And the next slide will show some additional details of the revenue budget. Good there? Thank you. So the only change reflected between the superintendent's recommended budget, the finance committee's budget, is an increase in the use of fund balance, again, to offset the $153,000 increase in salary and benefits. And that's reflected in the highlighted square there. And we again see that the overall increase from FY22 is 6.6 million and 5.2%. So the next slide is just showing the use of the fund balance by fund and type. And that's showing that the use of unassigned fund balance for the general fund has increased by the amount that we increased the salary and benefits by. So that has increased again by the $153,000. And then the next slide is just showing that there's no taxpayer increase related to the proposals approved by the Finance Committee, as the increase is again being funded by unassigned fund balance. And based on the superintendent's recommended budget, the school tax rate's expected to increase 28 cents to $7.05. And this translates to a $102 annual increase, $102 annual increase in property taxes based on a home with a median assessed value of $365,000. And that has not changed since the last presentation. I think that's the.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Kathy. So let's get into the specifics of what is in this budget in terms of new investments, and also talk about those additions that that you saw. So these are the investments that are in the recommended budget that I brought forward. So we've talked about these in the original presentation on March 15th, as well as throughout the discussions in the Finance Committee. So I'm not going to go into these in detail. Altogether, it was a little bit over $400,000. Many of these are investments that are significantly more in terms of their actual cost, but bring their own revenue stream. So, for example, our high school equity staffing enhancement was realized through the implementation of our staffing allocation formula. And so there were significant reductions that were then offset with the equity staffing enhancement, and it still netted a negative of almost $25,000. Our elementary librarian restructuring adds a significant number of librarians across the district, but again, at a very minimal cost because of the way that we've reorganized things. Things like the pre-K expansion or our Latinx support here at Paths are areas that bring their own revenue stream, whether it's state funding for pre-K or the use of CTE reserves for the Latinx programming here, which will add an English language support teacher, as well as language ed techs that are able to work with the students in their programs. So those things are actually coming with their own funding stream. And the largest investment here, so almost 3/4 of the total investment, is in curriculum and assessment. And these are primarily the professional development and materials that are at the center of our focus on teaching and learning, with our focus on Tier 1 instruction, ensuring that all of our students have access to high quality Tier 1 instruction. Many of these programs were originally funded with federal funds. And so this is our effort to put them at the center of our work by having it a part of our general fund budget. So the new things that are in the budget as a result of our conversations with the Finance Committee are what you see here. So the equivalent of 1 FTE of English language support teachers, half a teacher at LISEF, half at Deering High School, and that was primarily because that's what our staffing allocation formula called for. And we had significant conversations about it. And in the end, the Finance Committee decided that we needed to implement those recommendations with fidelity when we could. And so this is why that's in there. And the same is true for the social worker that you see there, a full position at Rowe Elementary School and 0.3 at the islands. And that is to bring that to a half-time. So there's 0.2 currently at the islands, and this will bring it to half a social worker position assigned to Cliff and Peaks Island. So those are the new things. That totals $153,000 that you heard Kathy mention. This is just for consistency's sake. This is the matrix of those investments, which we have for those who have seen our previous work. We have these for every single one of the new investments, and those are also reflected in the budget book with a narrative. I believe that we have not yet added the narrative for these to the budget book, but we will have them by the time that this goes to formal approval by the board at the April 5th meeting. So just wrapping up here, these are the key milestones in our budget process. We are, approaching the school board vote after tonight's hearing and first read. We will then move to bringing it to the city council on April 11th. The city council will go through its process and is scheduled to vote on it on May 16th, and June 14th is the public referendum on the budget. And just what's next specifically within the school board leg of this process, our next step will be the April 5th board vote. And so that's all we have for today. And so with that, I will open it up to any questions that you might have before we move into the public hearing.
Thank you so much, Mr. Superintendent, and Kathy as well. Okay, what questions does the board have? Mr. Youssef.
Thank you, Chair. What is the total of the fund balance that we have?
We have slides on that. I don't know that off the top of my head, but we can provide that easily after tonight's meeting. It actually will be in one of the documents that are in the board packet, so I can find those quickly. Just yeah. So I'll get you the exact number, but yes.
So if the budget being approved the way it is, that amount of money goes to next year?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Ms. Bondo. And thank you, Mr. Youssef.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a clarification, try to understand. I know we don't have some of our priorities are not included to the local budget. So I think, I think I didn't hear you well when you say that. I think some of them we can see along the way, are we going to use our ESSER?
Yes.
So can we estimate when roughly is going to happen?
So what
June?
we've talked about, and that's a discussion that the chair and I need to continue to have, but after the budget is off to the city council, that would be the time for us to bring that back to the finance committee and subsequently to the board to figure out what we want to do. I also just want to remind everyone that we made a commitment to having a participatory budget process. So our intent is to be able to combine those two efforts. So to be able to do the participatory budget at the same time as we consider some of the, the staff priorities that we've identified that are not funded in the current budget.
Okay, thank you.
And I can share real quick if you wanted to actually see. It's in the document called Finance Committee 324-2022 in your packet. slide 13, which
There's the fund balance.
that's the fund balance. I just need to, this is not in best format for viewing because it's a PDF, so I can't really project it, but that is, if I could expand this somehow, oops. That gives you an idea of what the fund balance is, Mr. Youssef. But Kathy, do you want to walk through that real quick? So it's almost 6 million in unassigned fund balance is what we're projecting at the end of 6/23.
Yeah. At the end of 22?
At the end of 22, it's 4.5 million. At the end of 23, it would be projected at almost 6 million.
That is just assuming that the 1.3 million for the custodian salary and benefits that we're proposing be used with ESSER funds would, the actual cost would be charged to ESSER funds, and then this would be part of the surplus that would be coming into the fund balance for those 2 years.
Kathy, could you explain that again?
So we budgeted a 1.3 million for custodial salary and
Yes.
benefits in the local budget, but we proposed to spend that money out of ESSER funds,
Right.
thus freeing up, if you will, 1.3 million a year for it to fund our fund balance,
Okay.
basically.
And so that hasn't been moved over yet.
We haven't completed FY '22 or
Okay.
obviously '23 yet, but that's what that 1.3 pretty much is just that.
Okay.
And it could be more, it could be less, but
Okay. So just maybe if I can help and correct me if I'm wrong, but when we passed our budget last year, after passing our budget, we received an additional allocation from the state because the governor had a supplemental budget. And with that money, we had used ESSER funds to cover. Is this
6.2 million in
Yeah.
total.
It
And
was
we were
six-
going to, yeah.
Mhm.
So we said we were going to use 1.3 to put the custodial salary and benefits that we had removed and were charging to ESSER 3 or 2. We were going to move those back onto the budget. And then we were going to take 3.4 to set up the reserve for debt service, and the remaining we were going to use to offset the tax impact.
Okay. Thank you for connecting all those dots again. Yes, Mr. Alazami.
So
Alzamili, I'm sorry.
it's fine. Did you say the tax burdens were increasing or weren't increasing?
It is increasing by 4.1. It has not changed from what I brought on March 15th. So as a result of the work of the Finance Committee, that did not change because we used the reserve. So there is a 4.1% increase in the tax rate. So that's, the $108 on a $365,000 home over the course of the year. That's the increase. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's specifically on the school portion of the taxes. So, yeah. Are there other questions?
That's this slide, Mr. Alzamili.
I just misunderstood earlier.
I had a quick question, which is if we could go back to, is this presentation now today's? If not, it's.
No, this isn't, but I can quickly switch to that.
If we could go back to one of the early slides that looks at the equity investments that we've made. So it's slide 7.
All right. to.
Sorry.
Do slideshow instead. It's a faster way to get there. It's the slide, right?
Thank you.
Yep.
My apologies. Just wanted to, on the ELL staff line, I'm just, as I've looked at the slide over the course of these meetings, tried to understand the changes in this line over time. We start with nearly 63 FTE, go down to 56 FTE, back up to 64 and a half, back down to 55, and then up to 69 FTE. So I'm just trying to understand the changes over time a little bit, and maybe there isn't a thread to pull through. I was thinking at the drop in FY21, was that due to ending the world languages program at the elementary school
No,
level?
those would not be included.
Because those
in there.
wouldn't be in
That
ELL.
It's generally because we, and it's hard, and we can obviously produce, who was in for all of those. But there were a couple of instances where we changed the ed tech structure. So ed techs that were considered ELL, sort of language ed techs, then became regular ed techs at the building. So they were basically taken off of the ELL staffing ratios. So I think that's the main thing that I recall in there. I don't know, Malia or Barb, if you're able to provide any additional details, but we can track that. There's obviously underneath this, there's all of the people that were identified in each of those years. So if you really wanted to get into that level of detail, we can.
No, it's more just the commitment to better meeting our ELL students. And this, when you look at the numbers this way, it doesn't tell us clear story. In
terms of just plain dollars, that's a 25% increase in the ELL
True.
staffing in
Yes.
that period of time. And so I think that that's the piece that this is primarily intended to show, is that there has been, so over these 5 years, doubling almost of our investment in these areas.
Javier, I'm happy to, I think that your comment about the ed techs was correct, and it's connected to title grants, and making sure that those funds are in fact adding resources to this population of students rather than subsidizing the local budget. But as you mentioned, we can definitely follow up with more specifics.
So I'm looking at it now that Kathy has a more detailed slide of that. Just to give you an example, in the change from FY18 to FY19, in FY18, there were 46 teachers and 16 ed techs. And then in 2019, there were 46 teachers and 10 ed techs. So I think that's where you can see where that fluctuation happened. In the shift.
So essentially, if I can try and restate what you had said, we had been characterizing ed techs as ELL staff, even though they were staff supporting our title programs, and so they were supporting a broader range of students throughout the school.
I believe that's correct. I don't have that level of detail on it. I don't know, Malia, if you do.
I think it was, I think we need to follow up, because I think it was less pertaining to who they were supporting and more about making sure that we were putting the appropriate resource allocation toward them in that here's Gail texting me. She said reduction of ed techs were languages we weren't needing at the time. But I think we would need to just follow up before the next meeting with the specifics of this, because it was a little bit complicated in terms of local budget and title budgets and how it was all working together for a total investment in supporting these students. So I think we should follow up with the specifics.
Okay, thank you so much. Are there other questions from the board? Okay. Seeing no other questions, I think we can move on, and that means that we move into our public comment on, our public hearing on the proposed fiscal year 2023 budget. So if you're a member of the public and you wish to address the board, you will have 3 minutes. Please indicate that you want to address the board by using the raise your hand feature in Zoom, and you will have 3 minutes to address the board. Is there anyone who would like to comment on our budget? I see Jim Hall. So Jim, go ahead. You have 3 minutes to address the board. Please start with your name and address.
Thanks, Jim Hall, District 1. At the outset of COVID, when every other city department dug deep and found a 5% decrease to keep taxes flat, the school department proposed a 5% increase. And that woke me up to the fact we've never really seen a school budget proposal describe how it's staying within the means of Portlanders. Global pandemic, raise taxes. Enrollment dropping, raise taxes. Revaluation doubles, some home assessments, raise taxes. And every year we see what to me looks like a branding strategy that elevates a couple enticing new spending programs. And then suddenly an argument for fiscal responsibility is primed as an argument against, say, equity in schools. Then every summer, about 5% of Portlanders show up to an off-cycle ballot. Half of those form the so-called majority that accepts the narrative. I know you're somewhat beholden to that schedule, but frankly, I wish you would do more to actively counter the harm it does to your legitimacy. We all saw in the press in the last election cycle that Portland pays more per student, but has worse equity outcomes than comparable Maine cities. The response that it takes time was limp at best, and the state has switched assessments, so sorry, we can't compare, only assume. We also heard from not one but two resigning board members that you've created an atmosphere where dissenting thought was not tolerated, and one would think you would be working hard to heal those scars. I think you must all be aware that property taxes are extremely regressive. Long before any new programs funded by tax increases can help anyone, they directly hurt poor and marginalized communities by driving up housing costs, including otherwise controlled rents. I watched the presentation to the Council's Finance Committee, and there just wasn't much talk about hard choices. Rather, you presented a wish list of additional roles and programs you want to add with temporary federal money. And somebody chose a very misleading chart to talk about improvements in math proficiency, which I find ironic. We've also used $30,000 of taxpayer money to lobby for a charter revision that attempts to remove state-mandated legislative review. I'll put it bluntly, you're a long way from earning trust in your overall fiscal responsibility. A good start would be to list specific belt tightening that allows you to keep Portland taxes low so working class people can afford to go to school here. Thanks.
Thank you, Jim. Are there other members of the public who would like to comment on the budget? Oops, sorry. I don't see any hands up. Just want to give folks another minute. If anyone's interested in commenting on the budget, we'd love to hear from you. All right, I don't see any hands, so I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing. And we are going to move on to our first read. This is first read of the proposed FY23 budget. And so as a reminder, at our next meeting on April 5th at 6 p.m., we will be taking further, we'll further consider, take any amendments, and then vote on our budget, on the FY23 budget. And I don't have anything else. So with that, I will look to the board for a motion to adjourn. Ms. Russell-Better, seconded by Ms. Bondo. All in support, just with a show of hands. It is unanimous. We are adjourned at 6:44 p.m. Thank you so much, everyone.